Jonas Cairn stood with 1 foot half out the door, clutching a lukewarm cup of station-grade tea and wondering why in the seven hells he hadn't left 5 minutes ago. The symposium chamber aboard Station Argento gleamed with polished metal floors and crystalline light pillars designed to impress visiting dignitaries from a dozen star systems. Long silk banners in various languages floated above the stage where interspecies cooperation was being celebrated with a kind of self-congratulation Jonas had always found exhausting. He shifted on his feet, aware of how out of place he looked, his wrinkled navy jacket doing a poor job of covering the still-streaked jumpsuit he'd worn that morning while crawling inside the fusion junction panel. His hair was too short to be fashionable, his boots still smelled faintly of insulation foam, and the engineers he usually bantered with were nowhere to be seen. Instead, sleek diplomats, professors with augmented retinal readers, and posturing security officials sipped luminescent cocktails and murmured about trade protocols and neurocognitive ethics. Jonas didn't belong here. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a politician, and he certainly wasn't anyone important. He'd only gotten the invite because the station governor wanted to make a public show of appreciating the backbone of operations. Fix a failing power grid before the summit begins? Congratulations. Here's a ticket to the fanciest room on the ship. No one actually expected him to stay. No one even noticed he was. The doors burst open with a quiet hiss of overpressure. Release, and the conversations didn't so much stop as stumble. A small figure darted in from the corridor beyond, her silver-white hair catching the ambient light like woven starlight. She couldn't have been more than 5, 6 years old, barefoot, panting and moving with the grace of someone not unfamiliar with attention. But it was her eyes that froze Jonas in place, amber gold, bright, unblinking. She scanned the room with sharp purpose, unaffected by the sudden hush. She turned once, twice, and then locked onto him. Jonas blinked. She was walking directly toward him, eyes locked like guidance lasers. He glanced behind him, thinking surely she was headed for someone else. But she stopped right in front of him, tilted her head to study his face, and then smiled. A smile that hit him low in the chest with something unnameable. "There you are, Daddy," she said clearly, in perfect standard. The room inhaled. He could feel it, the shift in attention, the snap of invisible eyes turning his way. Whispers rose like steam off hot metal. Jonas went still. The cup slipped from his hand, clattered to the floor, and rolled away, trailing a thin arc of brown liquid. Stared at the girl, stunned. "What?" She reached out, touched his knee with a hand so small he barely felt it. "I found you, just like I dreamed I would." A shadow loomed beyond her. The tall figure who entered next moved like a queen tall, robed in deep violet lined with silver threading. Her skin was the pale dust color of her species, eyes framed by delicate scales that shimmered with emotion. Her posture was regal, but when she saw the girl and followed her gaze, her steps faltered. Lyra yelled. The ambassador. Ice-veined Lireya, whose speeches once ended 3 wars in a single week, and Lireya froze. Her mouth parted slightly. Her eyes locked on Jonas. Her hands trembled. Jonas didn't move. The girl's hand was still on him, anchoring him with impossible confidence. Lireya's voice emerged like crushed glass. "No. It can't be. But the girl didn't flinch. She turned slightly and pointed at Jonas again. "He smells right. Like warm metal and the place between stars. Just like in the stories." Jonas couldn't speak. Not because he didn't want to, but because somehow, somewhere, something deep inside him had already whispered, "She's right." Jonas didn't remember walking. 1 minute he was standing in the middle of a frozen conference hall. The next he was seated in a private lounge with thick sound-dampening walls and soft ambient lighting, staring across from Lireya and the child, who still hadn't let go of his hand. Aelira, she'd said her name was. She'd said it with certainty, like a title worn proudly. Now she sat beside him, legs swinging off the edge of a leather bench, her silver hair a halo around her small head. The pendant around her neck caught his eye again, a compass made of burnished titanium and old steel, the same one Cale had always carried in his vest pocket, polished nightly like a ritual. Lireya sat across from them, stiff as a blade. Her hands were clasped so tightly on her lap, Jonas could see the pressure blanching her knuckles. Her eyes, those sharp amber eyes, kept darting between Aelira and him, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she never meant to finish. Jonas cleared his throat. "You said? She's your daughter?" Lireya didn't speak at first. Her gaze slid to Aelira, then back to him. "She is," she said finally, but the words sounded dragged out of her. "Biologically, legally. I've never seen her before in my life. I know, but she—" Jonas looked down at Aelira. She was humming quietly, swinging her feet, the compass in her hands now, spinning it like a toy. "She said? I'm her. She's been saying that since she could talk," Lireya said, voice flat, but Jonas didn't miss the undertone of restrained panic. "Describing you, not by name, not at first, but in detail, your laugh, your voice, even your habits." Jonas blinked. "My habits?" She said, "You hum when you're fixing things. You mutter equations under your breath like prayers. You like tea, but only if it's hot enough to scald your tongue." She said. Lireya stopped herself, swallowed. "She said you once turned off gravity to fix a coil because it reminded you of your childhood watching snowfall in Minnesota." Jonas felt his chest tighten. That wasn't public information. That wasn't anything. That was something he told Cale during a 3-hour systems repair in a dead freighter over Tyros 3. Late shift. No records, no logs, just memory. He looked back at Aelira. "How do you know that?" She shrugged. "You told me." Lireya exhaled, a sound like surrender. "She doesn't mean recently." "You mean in a dream?" "In dozens," Lireya sighed. "She has dreams of places she's never been, words she's never heard, machines she's never touched, and you always you. You're there in almost all of them. I thought they were figments. That she was just—" Her voice dropped. "Grieving in a way I couldn't understand." Jonas shook his head slowly. "But how could she dream about me?" Lireya looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because you were there when Cale died. It wasn't a question. It was a scalpel." Jonas nodded once. "He died in my arms. I was trying to stop the bleeding. It didn't matter. He gave me the compass." His eyes flicked to the pendant around Aelira's neck. "I thought it was gone." "He encoded a message into it," Lireya said, voice low. "But we've never been able to access it. Not with tech. Not with scans. It was like the data was buried, sealed by something beyond code." "Cale always said machines were the easy part," Jonas murmured. "People were the puzzle." Aelira piped up, still spinning the compass. "Daddy said you were a fixer, that when things break, you make them right, even when it's hearts, even when it's people." Jonas looked at her and the world swayed. Slightly. Lireya stood, pacing now. Her diplomatic mask was cracking around the edges. "There's a theory, an old one, abandoned even by our scientists, about neural echo transfer, that in the moments before death, certain minds, if emotionally charged enough, can imprint memories, feelings, even identity fragments onto unborn kin. You think Cale passed part of himself into her? Maybe," she whispered. "Or maybe into both of you." Jonas laughed, a single disbelieving sound. That's not how memory works." "No," Lireya agreed. "But love does." The silence that followed stretched, electric and heavy. Jonas looked down at Aelira again. And you? You think I'm your father? I don't think, she said gently. I know. Lireya looked up sharply, sudden realization dawning across her features. You never told her Cale's death was witnessed. That it was you? I kept it from her. I didn't want her seeking ghosts, Jonas swallowed. Then how did she know? The compass stopped spinning in Aelira's hand. She looked up, eyes shining. Because Daddy told me, from the stars. He said you'd be scared, that you'd run. But he also said you were the best part of him, and that I'd know you by the way. Your voice shook when you lied about not being brave. Jonas felt something inside him crumble, something that had stood rigid for years. Lireya slowly lowered herself back to the seat, staring at him with wonder and fear. I need to show you something, she said. What? We ran tests on her dreams, brain scans, neural activity, the patterns. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a slim data pad, her fingers trembling now. They match. Jonas, they match yours from your last psychological evaluation with the fleet. Jonas didn't speak. They're not dreams. Lireya said, voice breaking. They're memories. Jonas sat at the edge of a sterile examination table, hands clenched into fists on either side of him. The scent of antiseptic and humming diagnostics filled the air. He'd spent most of his adult life elbow-deep in plasma coils and cracked coolant pipes machines that whined and sparked and bled data. He understood systems. He trusted numbers. But nothing in this room made sense. Nothing at all. Across from him, projected onto a floating holodisplay, was a neural pattern. His dot next to it, another pattern, Aelira's, and to Jonas's untrained eye, they looked identical, not similar, not close. Identical. Dr. Sevra Kane, the station's lead neurogeneticist and an Illyrian of famously cold objectivity, stood silent beside the display. Her silver-scaled arms were folded tightly, her brows drawn in thought. For a moment she said nothing. Then, without looking at anyone, she spoke. In the deepest layers of memory processing, buried far below conscious thought, there are signal pathways unique to every sentient mind, like fingerprints of the soul. Jonas stared. And hers were formed before she was born, Kane said flatly. Before she ever met you. But they match your cortical imprint sequence, down to the emotional residue signatures. Jonas looked at Lireya, who stood beside the display with arms crossed so tightly across her chest it looked like she was holding herself together with sheer will. This shouldn't be possible, she said. No, Kane agreed. It shouldn't. Jonas exhaled slowly. But it is. The weight of the truth pressed into the room like increased gravity. He stood, pacing, the metal floor cold beneath his boots. Cale didn't just pass on stories. He passed me. A version of me, into her. She's been dreaming your memories. Kane confirmed. And not just images, emotional context. Reactionary echoes. She reacts to stress the way you do. She calms herself the same way by reciting mechanical systems in sequence. That's not mimicking. That's inherited emotional memory. Lireya turned away, bracing herself against the console. My people dismissed this. Said it was myth. Said it was dangerous. Jonas shook his head. What's dangerous is pretending it's not real. The door opened, and Aelira padded in, barefoot as usual, her soft tunic slightly too long for her, dragging as she walked. She carried something in her hands, a half-disassembled toy drone that Jonas had seen in the observation lounge. She had taken it apart cleanly, methodically. Not ripped, not cracked. Unplugged in the exact order an engineer would. She approached Jonas and offered the drone. I think it wants to fly again, she said softly. He took it from her hands, inspecting the work. The magnetic bearings were aligned, the wiring set aside neatly in coils. Even the micro-rotor stabilizers had been separated without damage. "Where did you learn how to do this?" he asked gently. "I remembered you showing me," she said. "Not with words, in the way your hands moved." Kane whispered something under her breath in her native dialect. Lireya pressed her palms to her eyes. Jonas crouched in front of the child. "You know I'm not your real dad, right? Not the one who gave you life?" Aelira looked confused for a moment. "But you gave me shape. I wouldn't be me without you." Jonas froze. That wasn't a child's answer. That was Cale's phrasing. Almost exactly what he'd said once while describing how love worked in his culture. "We give each other shape." Like river to rock. Kane interrupted quietly. "There's something else." They all turned. She brought up another display, this one, showing layers of genome data. Her DNA is fully Aelirian, but her neuropathways, they've adapted over time, shifted, as if they were reorganizing to accommodate a foreign rhythm. Not human DNA, but something ... like human presence. Her brain has been restructured around Jonas's pattern. You saying she single quotes S ... what? Becoming me? Jonas asked. No, Kane said, voice low. I'm saying she's always had you inside her. Lireya collapsed into a chair, staring at the wall. He planned this, she whispered. Cale knew he wouldn't survive that mission. He told me if anything happened, he'd find a way. To keep her safe, that he'd leave her more than just a name. Jonas stepped back, stunned. He never said anything to me. Because if he had, Lireya murmured, you wouldn't have let him go. And that hit him like a hammer. Because she was right. Jonas would have fought, begged, bled to keep Cale back if he'd known what was at stake. But Cale had always known how to carry burdens alone. Always smiling, always calm. And apparently, even in death, always preparing. He used me, Jonas said bitterly. As a vessel. He trusted you, Lireya corrected. With her. With what mattered most. Aelira moved closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. You still smell. Like engines and warm sleep, she whispered. Just like in the dreams. Jonas closed his eyes, overwhelmed. What did it mean to be a father to a child who carried your memories but not your blood? What did it mean to be remembered before ever meeting? When he opened his eyes, Lireya was watching him not with suspicion. Any more, but with something harder to face. Hope. Jonas stood slowly. What happens now? Kane stepped forward. There's a test. An ancient one, outlawed by most science councils, but still practiced by a few old Illyrian houses. A ritual. To confirm shared essence. It's not DNA. It's not tech. It's resonance. What kind of resonance? Emotional, neural, spiritual, if you believe in that. Jonas glanced at Lireya. She nodded slowly. It's called the joining table. It shows what words can't, if what you share with her is real. Jonas looked at the child beside him, bright-eyed, brilliant, impossibly full of someone else's memories and yet entirely herself. Then let's do it, he said, and behind him, Aelira beamed like a star, remembering how to shine. The door to the joining table chamber slid open without sound, revealing a room older than anything else aboard Station Argento. Jonas stepped inside slowly, his breath catching. The chamber didn't look like technology. It looked like it had grown from the bones of the ship itself, walls pulsing with a faint inner light, like veins just beneath skin. The air was warm and still. It smelled not of metal or ozone, but something older, like stone after rain, like memory caught in STASIs. The center of the chamber was a platform, a low circle carved from some living mineral Jonas couldn't identify. Around it, concentric rings were inlaid with soft, glowing sigils that flickered in patterns that changed when he moved. He didn't know what he'd expected. But it wasn't this. Lireya stood behind him, wearing ceremonial robes she hadn't touched, in a decade royal blues lined with silver that marked her not just as diplomat, but as heir to a forgotten bloodline. Her posture was straight, but Jonas had known her long enough now to see the strain under her spine, the tension in her jaw. Aelira walked in last, barefoot as always. She paused just inside the doorway, staring at the platform with something between awe and familiarity. "It's like in the dreams," she whispered. Jonas turned. "You've seen this place before?" She nodded. "Not the room, but the feeling. The warmth behind my eyes. Like when I think of Daddy's laugh. Or your voice when you say my name." He swallowed hard. Dr. Kane was already inside, adjusting readings at a panel far off in the shadows. She wouldn't be part of the ritual. No one outside the bond could be, but she'd monitor everything: brainwaves, heart rate, the resonance fields. Jonas appreciated the safety net, even if he didn't understand the web they were standing in. Lireya stepped forward, her voice barely above a breath. This chamber was outlawed for a reason. In the old days, it proved too much, too real. Some connections shattered under the weight of truth. Jonas looked her in the eye. "And what happens if we pass?" Lireya looked at Aelira, then back at him. "Then nothing can deny you're hers, not council, not law, not blood." Jonas nodded and stepped onto the platform. It didn't hum or glow. It didn't vibrate or speak. It simply accepted him. Lireya led Aelira onto the opposite side. The child sat cross-legged, perfectly still. Lireya gave Jonas one last warning look. "If you're unsure, if you hesitate, it will show." He wasn't unsure. He sat, mirroring Aelira, knees nearly touching. "Now," Lireya said softly, "reach forward and let your hand rest above hers. Don't touch." "Not yet." Jonas obeyed. Aelira looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting the strange light. "You're scared," she said. Jonas smiled faintly. "A little." "It's okay. Daddy said fear is what happens when love doesn't want to lose." And then her hand rose, their palms aligned without touching. A breath apart. The floor lit up. Not dramatically, not in some flashy burst, just gently. As if the chamber itself sighed in recognition. The light traced up the lines between their hands, then down into the floor, creating spirals that pulsed with their heartbeats. A low tone rang through the air. "Not heard but felt." Jonas gasped. And the memories began. Not Aelira single quotes s. His. Suddenly he was 12 years old again, hiding under his grandfather's workbench during a thunderstorm, gripping a broken circuit and whispering how he'd fix it after. The lightning stopped. Then Aiding, watching his ship launch for the first time. The feeling of awe, fear, wonder. Then Kale, laughing over noodles in a half-powered galley. Singing badly to keep awake during shift rotation. Blood on metal, smoke and fire. Don't run from her, Jonas. She'll find you. And in every memory, Aelira was there. Watching, feeling, reaching. Then it changed. Now her memories flooded in. Aelira in her crib, staring up at stars through a viewport. Lireya humming to her. Kale's voice recorded telling her bedtime stories, his voice cracking because he knew he wouldn't live to meet her. Then Jonas again. She saw him before ever seeing him. His shadow in her dreams. His voice in her bones. The room pulsed brighter. Lireya's breath caught audibly behind them. Kane's panel began flashing red. The bond was too deep. Jonas felt pressure heat behind his eyes, his chest aching. Then Kale's voice, not recorded, not remembered. Jonas, I knew you'd run from the pain, so I made sure she'd run toward you. Aelira's voice trembled. He's here, in the middle, between us. Their hands touched. And the floor flared. A bloom of light enveloped them both. Lireya shouted. Kane's sensors overloaded. But Jonas wasn't scared. He was home. In the light he saw himself, not as he was, but as Aelira saw him, safe, strong, kind, flawed, but trying. A man not chosen by fate but by love. When the light faded, Jonas was crying. Aelira leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "You're real now," she whispered. "All the way real." Lireya stepped forward, hesitant. "What did you see?" Jonas stood, lifting Aelira with him. She clung to his neck like gravity itself held no more meaning. "I saw her memories," he said, "but also mine. And Kale's, not as pieces, but as a single thread." He looked Lireya in the eye. "She's mine." Lireya nodded. There were tears in her eyes, but she didn't hide them. "Yes," she said quietly, "and somehow you've always been." Dr. Kane stepped forward, stunned. The resonance pattern stabilized into a third waveform. Not Aelira. Not Jonas. A shared signature. She's imprinted with him. Jonas felt the words settle over him like armor. Father. Not by biology, but by truth. Lireya exhaled slowly. "The council will demand answers." "Then give them one," Jonas said. "They won't understand this. They don't have to." He held Aelira a little closer. "She does. That's enough." The chamber pulsed once more, soft golden. A whisper of approval. Outside, beyond the walls, Station Argento continued its orbit. Inside, something ancient had awoken, and three souls, grief-torn, scattered, had begun to orbit each other, drawn into the gravity of something undeniable. Something whole. The storm didn't hit all at once. It started with a request for clarification from the station's Interspecies Ethics Committee. Then a flagged report from Dr. Kane's lab was mysteriously leaked to the Sector Medical Network. Within 24 hours, 3 different council factions on Aelira Prime had sent encrypted messages to Lireya, demanding a full account of the unauthorized joining table ritual and why a Terran civilian was seen holding an onsen-loathing Illyrian royal child in public view. By the end of the second day, the story had reached the outer colonies. The headlines ranged from cautious curiosity to outright condemnation. Unregistered human parenting, royal line child, neural inheritance or memory implant. Hoax? Is this the next stage in cross-species evolution? Or just a dangerous lie? Jonas tried to ignore them. He wasn't built for politics. But even he could feel the pressure rising around them like atmosphere before a hull breach. He stayed close. To Aelira, she didn't say much about the noise. She played with her tools, practiced her reading, and sometimes sat beside him without a word, just being. But she knew. One evening, she looked up from her sketch pad, where she'd drawn 3 stick figures holding hands under a stylized constellation, and asked, "Am I going to be taken away?" Jonas felt something in him fracture. "No," he said, "not while I'm breathing." A pause. "And if they take your breathing?" He didn't have a good answer. Lireya did. She entered the room in full diplomatic uniform, dark steel blue, with her family's crest displayed on her shoulder. Her hair was tied back in formal braids, and her eyes no longer carried uncertainty. "Only fire. Then they'll have to get through me too," she said, kneeling before her daughter. Aelira touched her forehead gently to her. "Mothers, you smell like stormlight when you're mad." "I'm not mad," Lireya whispered. "I'm ready." Later that night, they gathered in Lireya's personal quarters. The lights were low. Jonas sat on the floor, Aelira curled against him, asleep. Her breath was slow and steady, hand wrapped around the collar of his shirt like a child afraid he'd disappear. Lireya poured herself a glass of clear amber wine and stood by the viewport, looking out at the stars. "She's too calm," Jonas said softly. "Too ready for things children shouldn't have to be ready for." "She's Kale's daughter," Lireya replied, "and now yours." "Yeah," he said, Now mine. She looked over her shoulder. We have a hearing, 5 days from now, not just a local ruling. High tribunal. They'll decide if what happened in the joining table holds legal standing or if you're to be separated from her. Jonas exhaled slowly. And if they rule against us? Lireya turned to face him fully. Then they'll try to take her back to Aelira Prime, raise her under royal oversight, declare her a protected anomaly. You mean a prisoner? Lireya didn't correct him. He stood gently, lifting Aelira into his arms and placing her on the couch. She stirred but didn't wake. Then he turned to Lireya. Then we fight, he said. The day of the hearing came like thunder trapped in glass shards of tension hiding behind polished ceremony. The tribunal chamber, aboard Station Argento, was circular, immense, and terrifyingly silent. 12 seats formed a ring, each occupied by a representative from a different world within the interstellar concord. Judges of law, culture, science, and tradition. Lireya stood in the center of the chamber, voice calm but taut as wires under strain. My daughter was not born to be studied. She was born to be raised, loved, guided. Jonas stood beside her. He hadn't shaved. His boots were scuffed. But he stood tall, eyes unwavering as the senior tribunal counselor asked, Mr. Cairn, do you believe you are this child's father? He didn't blink. No. A hush swept the chamber. I don't believe it, he clarified. I know it, not in blood, but in everything that counts. I know what her laugh sounds like when she figures out a circuit problem. I know the way she hums when she's nervous. I know that she's inherited her mother's fierce logic and her father's boundless heart. I didn't give her life, but I've held her when she was scared. I've fixed her drones. I've held her hand while she dreamed. I've become what her father asked me to be with his last breath. He turned slightly, voice lower now, intimate in the wide chamber. You want to know what defines a parent? It's not genes. It's not legality. It's showing up, every day, no matter how scared you are. It's loving her even when it's hard. Especially then. Aelira stood at his side now, her small hand in his. One of the Aelirian counselors leaned forward. And you, child? What do you say? Aelira looked up at the 12 with all the composure of someone far older. I dreamed of him before I met him, she said. I remembered his voice before I heard it. He smells like home and old tools and stars. And when he hugs me, I don't feel like a mistake. I feel like me. That's my Jeff. Your Jeff? One judge echoed, startled. Daddy. Gave me life, she said quietly. But Jeff gives me shape. The room still. Then, one by one, the council began to vote. The ruling came just before midnight. Jonas stood on the balcony with Lireya beside him, watching the station's light drift across the planet below. Aelira was asleep inside, curled, in a nest of blankets and wires and old circuit boards. Lireya didn't speak. She just handed him the official scroll. He unrolled it with trembling fingers. The seal was there. Recognition granted. Guardianship approved. Full status acknowledged. Parent by memory, bond by ritual, guardian by choice. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since Cale died. Did we win? He asked. Lireya smiled. We didn't win. He looked at her. We became. He stepped inside. Aelira stirred as he sat beside her. Jeff? She murmured, half-asleep. Double quotes. Yeah, little star. Are we still a family? Always. She sighed. Into sleep again, and somewhere in the void between stars, a laugh echoed softly across the dark. Cale's laugh. And this time it sounded like peace. They didn't call it exile. They called it transition to low visibility residential sectors, but Jonas knew exile when he saw it. After the tribunal's ruling, the political backlash came fast and quiet. Lireya was removed from the ambassadorial rotation and reassigned to cultural advisory duties in a distant satellite colony on the edge of the Centurion Belt. Officially, they weren't being punished. Unofficially, they'd become too powerful an idea. A cross-species child who carried memories not just through blood, but through emotion. A Terran engineer recognized not by DNA, but by presence, and a mother willing to tear down tradition to protect it all. The Concord could accept almost anything except change that looked too much like truth. So now they lived aboard Savant's Reach, a quiet orbital station buried in an asteroid nebula where nothing happened and no one looked too closely. It suited Jonas just fine. He spent his mornings tuning grav sleds for board security officers and his evenings helping Aelira rebuild ancient AI cores from museum wreckage scavenged from nearby moons. Lireya lectured virtually, her voice still sharp and her words sharper. But beneath the quiet, something had started to shift. Aelira was dreaming again, more vivid, more often. And this time, it wasn't just memory echoes. It was voices. It began one night, when she woke screaming from sleep, eyes wide, heart pounding, mouth spilling half sentences in a language even Lireya didn't recognize. Jonas reached her first, wrapping his arms around her as she trembled. "They're calling," she whispered. "Not Daddy, not the old dreams. New ones. Who's calling?" Jonas asked gently. She looked at him with fear that didn't belong to a child. "The ones who see through stars." Over the next week, Aelira grew quiet. Not afraid, watchful. She spent hours in front of the viewport, sketching in silence. Jonas watched the drawings with unease. Stars with eyes, machines, shaped like song, spirals that looked suspiciously like ancient glyphs from pre-Illyrian history. Lireya dug through archives and sent encrypted questions to scholars she trusted. Name kept surfacing, the Seedborn. Myth older than either of their species. Whispers of beings that could imprint not just memory, but consciousness, riding from life form to life form like echoes in flesh, waiting for the right host to awaken. Kale had studied them once, long before he joined the military. He'd written theories about dormant signals, emotional resonances passed between generations. The scientific community had laughed it off, called it grief-anchored pseudoscience. But Kale had never stopped believing. Jonas found an old recording Kale's voice on a secure drive hidden in the compass pendant. "If I die before she's born, if the dreams start early, it means I was right, and it means you, Jonas, are the key. The failsafe. The anchor. Not just for her, for whatever comes next." Jonas played the message 5 times, then 6. And on the 7th, he realized something chilling. Kale's voice wasn't a simple log. It was a map. They took the compass to the deep archive, a part of the station sealed off after a containment breach a decade earlier. Lireya bypassed the doors with a mixture of old access codes and new firewalls Jonas had built into a neural bypass circuit. Inside, the walls breathed. Not literally, but something about the silence felt alive. At the center stood an old Cathari mind table, one of the few artifacts known to record not just data but consciousness shapes. Aelira stepped forward without hesitation. Jonas reached for her. "We don't even know what this thing does." "I do," she said. "It wants to show you." Before they could stop her, she placed the compass on the pedestal. The room ignited. Symbols flared to life across the walls. Ancient glyphs spiraled outward. The temperature dropped. Jonas grabbed Lireya's arm as light surged from the table and wrapped around Aelira. Her body didn't move, but her eyes glowed. And then she spoke, but not in her voice, not even in Kale's. A third voice, ancient, multi-layered, male and female. "Human and not. You are the bridge," it said. "The circle closed by death, opened by love." Jonas stepped forward. "Who are you?" The voice smiled through Aelira's lips. We are the memory of stars, the keepers of imprint. We were forgotten. But now we awaken. Lireya's voice cracked. Why now? Because the child is born of chosen bonds, not broken lineage. Because the Terran carries resonance he does not understand. Because Kale gave more than memory, he gave permission. Jonas's knees buckled. This is too much. She's just a girl. No, the voice replied. She is the next layer, the seed reborn. Light collapsed back into the table. Aelira fell forward into Jonas's arms, limp but breathing. Lireya knelt beside them, eyes wide. What does it mean? She asked. Jonas looked down at the girl in his arms. It means Kale didn't just prepare her to remember. He looked at Lireya. He prepared us to protect her. And from somewhere deep within the vault, a hum began, a signal, old, repeating in perfect rhythm with Aelira's heartbeat. The seedborn weren't coming. They had already arrived, and they had been using Aelira's dreams to wake up. The signal didn't stop. It pulsed through the walls of Savant's reach, threading its rhythm into the wiring, the lights, the air itself. At first, only the oldest instruments picked it up, a faint echo on auxiliary channels, mistaken for background radiation. But Jonas knew better. He recognized the shape of it. It was a heartbeat, not random. Calling. The seedborn weren't invading. They were activating. Aelira slept for nearly 20 hours after the resonance event in the deep archive. Lireya monitored her closely, her fingers rarely leaving her daughter's pulse. Jonas stayed beside her the entire time, one hand always near the compass. It hadn't pulsed since the chamber closed. It had gone inert, like it had finally delivered its message and was now simply waiting. When Aelira finally opened her eyes, the stars were wrong. She said it as casually as a child commenting on the weather. The sky feels tilted, she whispered, her voice distant but clear. Jonas looked up through the station's viewing dome. Everything seemed the same, but the way Aelira looked at it made his skin crawl. Something's changed, Lireya murmured, watching her daughter carefully. Aelira sat up, her silver hair drifting around her like a halo. She turned her face toward the stars and said something in a language no one on the station had ever heard before. And every light in the station dimmed. Jonas reached for her. Aelira. It's okay, she said, smiling faintly. They're listening now. Who? Lireya asked. The ones Daddy whispered to in his last breath. The ones who left the first echoes behind. The ones who remember. Before either adult could speak again, the station AI flared a proximity warning. 3 vessels had just dropped out of fold space at the edge of the asteroid belt. Unregistered. Non-Concord. Impossible geometry. They weren't ships in the conventional sense. More like ideas given form. Structures that folded and twisted in upon themselves. Organisms of metal and thought. Energy and intention. The seedborn had arrived. The next 12 hours unraveled everything Jonas thought he understood about the universe. They didn't come to conquer. They didn't speak through weapons or demands. They simply waited. Their message, translated through ancient protocols buried in the Aelirian archives, was simple. The vessel has awakened. The bridge is formed. What will you choose? Lireya stood at the command deck, her diplomatic instincts flaring to life, but this was beyond negotiation. Beyond law. This was inheritance. They want her, Jonas said quietly. They need her, Lireya corrected. But they don't want to take. They're asking. Jonas turned to his daughter. Aelira? She nodded slowly. They're not. Inside me. Not like a possession. More like music waiting to be played. I can hear them, and they can feel me. They've been looking for someone who could carry the memory across species. Not through domination, through connection. Jonas knelt before her. Do you want to go? I don't want to leave. But I don't think it's about leaving. I think it's about choosing who I want to become." Tears stung his eyes. "You're just a little girl." "No," Lireya whispered. She was. But we knew this was coming. Cale knew. Aelira reached out, touching both their faces. "You? Don't lose me. That's what the dreams have always said. Love doesn't vanish, it just takes new shape. If I go, I'll still be me. I'll still be yours." Jonas's voice cracked. "Then what happens?" "I'll come back," she said softly. "Not tomorrow. Maybe not in a year. But I'll return when the stars realign, when the seedborn have learned what they need. And I'll bring stories. And I'll bring peace." Lireya's hands trembled. "You're just a child." "I'm your child," Aelira said. "And his. And Cale's. And now there's two." The seedborn sent a final signal. Not pressure. Not threat. An open channel. And offer. Jonas looked at Lireya. Her lips were pale. Her eyes full of rage, grief, pride. "Let her choose," she said through clenched teeth. "We gave her shape. Let her give it meaning." Jonas turned to his daughter. "Then you go with everything we are. Every bit of love and madness and memory we ever poured into you. You go with our hands holding your heart." Aelira smiled, and walked into the light. The seedborn vessel opened, not with machinery, but with light shaped like memory. Like wind in a forest you'd never seen but always missed. She stepped inside. The ship shimmered once, and then was gone. No flash. No sound. Just absence. Weeks passed. Station Argento returned to silence. Jonas fixed engines. Lireya lectured. But something had changed. The universe felt closer. And then 3 months later, on a quiet morning, a signal pinged Jonas's wristpad. One phrase. No encryption. She taught us how to laugh. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared. At the stars, Lireya came and stood beside him. No words exchanged. They understood. She was still theirs. In the starlight, they planted a marker. Not a grave, not a memorial, just a stone. With 3 symbols, a circuit, a star, and a hand, the shape of a family that rewrote the rules of connection. Years later, when Aelira returned taller, older, wrapped in light and wisdom, no child could carry, she stepped off the seedborn vessel and ran straight into Jonas's arms. "Fix things," she whispered, "like you taught me." And in that moment, Jonas finally believed what Cale had always said, that broken things aren't meant to be thrown away. They're meant to be held and remembered. And sometimes reborn.